I'm JJ Perez from Inside Runner Sports. That is Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News, coming to you to wrap up UTSA football's week 4 win at who do we play?
It was Colorado State, sir.
Yeah, it's been a long few days since the Colorado State trip. Very little. I'm still catching up on my sleep, Greg. I
Yeah,
don't
dude,
know.
I'm all over the place too. I feel you. That's why you tried to start this at whatever time, and I was like, give me 15 minutes. I was just like reading all my notes again so I could maybe have something intelligent to say.
So where do we start with this one, Greg? I think a overly dramatic win. Robert Henry goes crazy while the offense struggles. The defense actually plays pretty decent, but then falls apart in the fourth quarter to give up the lead, but somehow comes up with a goal line stance to preserve the win. Pretty wild game for week 4 in what is the lowest scoring win in the Jeff Traylor era.
Yeah, I feel like anybody clicking on this wants to hear about the negative, but we could start with the positive
Right.
anyway. That's
Yep.
that's a decent way to go.
Robert Henry. Robert Henry, right? This guy's
Yeah,
incredible.
came up with the two big plays that they really needed, and everybody hates all the third and whatever draw calls, but he took one 76 yards for a touchdown, so you sort of get why that's such a big part of the offense. And he's done that every week now that he's got more. I think aside from Ashton Genty last year, he's got more 70 plus yard rushes in a season than anybody in the last 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
And it's only week
Wow.
4. And so we'll see if he's able to continue anything close to this pace through the rest of the year. He just looks like a different kind of player than he was last year. And at this point, it's not that surprising anymore when he goes out and does this based on what we've seen so far. And they really need it because the rest of the offense isn't really rolling at that high of a level. But you mentioned the defensive side of it. And we just never would have thought, based on the way this team was structured this year, that you would see a game like this where UTSA struggles that much on offense, and the defense is the one that has to really kind of carry it and keep them in it. And I think if you probably asked the Colorado State fans, they might not have been all that impressed with UTSA's defense. I think they were more concerned with their own guys struggling, and we saw them. I don't remember how many points they put up against the FCS opponent, Northern Colorado, the week before, but it wasn't a ton. I
Right.
think they have plenty of concerns about their own offense. And so maybe from that perspective, there's reasons not to give UTSA's defense too much credit, but we wouldn't have thought that against anybody that they could deliver this kind
Right.
of a performance, much less kind of on the road against a team that's got a winning record for whatever kind of weaknesses they may have as well. So, yeah, I think those two things, Robert Henry and the defense, you should feel good about if you're a UTSA fan.
Yeah, I think just overall my thoughts were it was a very clunky game. I don't know if that's the right word. Neither offense played great, right? And the game was 7-3, then 10-3. The game felt over at 10-3. We had a scoreless third quarter, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden we got fireworks in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, there wasn't really a whole ton of rhythm to it. I think the penalties played a huge part in
Yeah.
that. We talked all last year about UTSA's penalty
Both
problem.
sides, both
And
sides had
right.
troubles with
Colorado
penalties.
State was much worse. They ended up with a much higher total, but we talked last year about UTSA's penalty problem quite a bit. In the first 3 games, it hadn't really shown up as much. They've been average to above average in terms of like where they would rank nationally in penalties through 3 games, and this one was a little bit of a step back. And then there's a lot of stupid penalties in there, some stuff on special teams and things
Right.
that like they could be avoided. So we'll see if there's like a trend there that starts and continues. But for now, maybe it's just a one-off on terms of like all the stuff we talked about last year with the discipline and some of the things that lead to those penalties. So it's just worth keeping an eye on. But at this point, I wouldn't say it's a huge red flag, but it did kind of contribute to the game being a little bit weird, like you said.
Let's talk about that last kind of sequence of events in that fourth quarter where Robert Henry takes a check down or a blitz pickup and takes it to the house, and you're like, oh wow, UTSA is going to get out of here with the win. But then, Colorado State's able to come up with the game tying scoring drive, but then an offsides that kind of forces the hand of Colorado State to go for two. I don't hate the call or the decision to go for two from their standpoint. I don't know if I love that play call from them, but credit to UTSA. I think Ty Milton kind of blew up that play. Brandon Tucker fitted that play pretty good, and there was nowhere for Colorado State to go on that 2-point conversion. Is that what you saw after rewatching it, Greg?
Yeah, and there was Jacavian Rogers and Devin Martin both did a good job staying with their guys in a play where I think Colorado State was sort of assuming that UTSA would sell out for the run and that somebody would be wide open and be one of those kind of free touchdown throws that you see on a lot of these plays near the end zone. UTSA's guys all, Shad Banks said they all did their job, and it's like such a cliche, but they're really in that scenario. That's sort of how it played out because it, like you said, it starts with Ty Milton sort of picking up the running back initially and forcing the play back out farther
Yeah,
than I think that the quarterback wanted to have to roll back, and then Tucker. I think Brandon Tucker might have left a little bit more of an opening there for that pass to potentially get off than the coaches probably were happy to see on film, but he was close enough that they ended up kind of stretching the play out to the sideline and it went out of bounds. But I'll disagree with you a little bit. I don't understand why you go for two there. Given that you've brought in the backup quarterback and he's led two scoring drives, and the other team has not shown the ability to move the ball aside from big plays. So if you're going to set up in these red zone situations in overtime, especially at home, and especially the way that you've worn down UTSA's defense through the second
yeah,
half, I think you would have a huge advantage there if you're Colorado State. And so the decision to put the game all on this 1 2 point conversion play, unless you have one that you think is like 100%, which maybe they did, and maybe they were
yeah.
just about that. But I don't know, that felt like an unnecessary risk. And it wasn't the first time. I mean, it's obviously super easy to be critical of the coach that you don't cover, but I thought some of there was certainly one fourth down decision there late that I just didn't understand with the way that Colorado State hadn't moved the ball through the game to go for it on 4th and 5 near midfield or whatever it was. Just like that's a call that I love in a vacuum, but I want to go for it as much or more than anybody, but that one was just like, what makes you think you're going to get that? Just based on the way this game's been playing, it's like probably the only time you'll ever hear me say that you might just want to play field position there. So, stuff like that. I think Colorado State probably is. I don't think anybody who watched this game from the Colorado State perspective was like, "Wow, that UTSA is really good." I think they're just like, "We have a ton of issues." So
Right,
that's
right.
not probably the best position to be in if you're a UTSA fan because a lot of them are feeling the same thing.
Yeah. Just to wrap up the defense real quick, I mean, they probably played as good as anybody could ask, considering all things considered, but they were kind of struggling down the stretch, right? The offense had a bunch of three and outs, and the defense was on the field a lot in the second half. And yeah, and to your point, that the momentum felt all Colorado State. So if they go to overtime, who knows how that turns out?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not necessarily fair to say if Colorado State had started the other quarterback, which I don't think was ever really in consideration. But if they had gone to Jackson Bristow earlier in the game, that maybe he would have had the same level of success he had on
Yeah,
the couple drives when UTSA's defense was worn down. And I also wonder if Colorado State didn't put themselves in such a bind with some penalties, if UTSA's defensive effort would have looked as good. But there were still like on a play-by-play basis, the numbers say that UTSA's defense played pretty well. So I'm not trying to take away too much from them, but I do think there were just a lot of things that Colorado State did poorly
yeah.
that kept them from potentially capitalizing on some different things that might have been available.
I do want to give some players some flowers on the defensive end before we talk about the offense, which is probably going to be an over negatively discussion. But I mean, wow, Shad Banks continues to deliver monster performances every week. And we saw Nana Anuanu. Did I pronounce that right, Greg?
I
Kind of
think it's
like,
on Yanwu, but we're in the
yeah,
ballpark.
yeah, a breakout performance, right? Nobody saw that. He entered this thing on a pitch count, and he went down at some point, and you hold your breath because he's had two ACLs that's kept him sidelined. But I mean, here's a guy in a spot where UTSA desperately needed some production there, and he more than delivered.
Yeah, for anybody who wasn't sure, Nana was back out there for the last drive, so it doesn't look like that injury is going to be a serious thing. There's something that's going to linger, and you could tell just by the way he ran off the field that he seemed like he was feeling pretty good. So that's something that UTSA fans don't have to be too worried about. And man, we've talked about that position so much with Cam Cooper and even some uncertainty there, but at least feeling like based on how his teammates talked about him and the coaches talked about him, that he was ready to kind of fill that role a little bit. For him to go down, and then you're looking at Vic Shaw and Don Munnerlin who hadn't produced, and as far as Jeff Traylor saying things negative about players, that's about as close as you're going to get, where it's just like they kind of weren't necessarily ready and needed work, and now they kind of have to step up. And so to have somebody who is clearly ready for this role to get, 3 sacks speaks for itself. But I think it was only the seventh time a UTSA player had 3 sacks in a game in the history of the program. So that just sort of tells you about how momentous that was with some of the guys who have played that position. I mean, I think Jamoria Robinson did it, once, and he was
Yeah.
the player of the year. So that's something that UTSA should probably try to lean on as much as possible, as much as his physical health and conditioning will allow through the rest of the year, because he's just such a step up from the other guys that we've seen at that position, and it has a huge impact on the game there. Where I think there was 3 or 4 drives that basically ended on plays that he was central to. whether it was all three sacks, I think turned out to be critical. I believe one of them was a fourth down play, another one was a third down, and then there was a third or fourth down pass that he disrupted too, just kind of getting around the edge and getting his hand on the ball as the quarterback was trying to throw it and led to an incomplete pass. So it seems like he's just completely changes the dynamic for the UTSA defense, and that's probably part of what we're talking about with why this was such a better performance than they've seen. He played no small part in that.
Yep, big monster game. Excited to see how he continues to grow in that role, considering he's off that he gets off that pitch count where he sees more snaps. Greg, I want to characterize the offensive performance here. I know a lot of people aren't happy with the offensive production, and clearly it's not at a high level, but for me, it's kind of like it was the best of times and it was the worst of times because you have an offensive line that's probably playing at a pretty high level, along with a record setting running back. But then you have a passing game that's just all out of sorts. No rhythm, no consistency. And it seems like, they're struggling to find a way there. Is that kind of a fair assessment of what we've
Well,
seen
yeah,
through
and
four games?
it's just really confusing because we saw the same group have a lot of success last year. It felt like there were times where Owen was kind of carrying the offense to whatever level they could get to, which wasn't great in the beginning, but by the end of the year, they were a top 15 offense in the country statistically. And that counts some of the early games where they were struggling. I mean, I should go through and cut the season in half and see second half of the year what they averaged offensively, but they were probably at least a
Top
top 10
10? Yeah.
in the country in that span. And so it's really, confounding why they wouldn't be able to. And you don't even have to pick up at that exact level from day one when you have some new pieces and some new guys and some transfers you're getting integrated and stuff. But to be so far away from what they accomplished last year when that was supposed to be the group that coming back this season was going to really carry them and be this huge difference maker and spark everything that was going to potentially go right for this team and lead to a lot of optimism. We're talking about, is Owen one of the best quarterbacks in the G5, and is this one of the best offenses at that level? And you just would never expect that those guys would struggle in this way where it's just not clicking in the passing game, especially downfield. Everything they hit is underneath. Owen, his downfield passing numbers are very, very low, both in terms of the volume and the percentage. And that was the case early last year, but you would think that that's just growing pains. You don't expect that you have to repeat that process again the next season when he's already been there and done it.
Yeah, it does seem like Owen is struggling. I don't know how much of the wide receiver group's health has contributed to that. I mean, we headed into this point, we didn't know about a lot of the injuries. It sounds like there aren't very many, fully healthy wide receivers at this point of the season, right? I think they had to go to a walk-on for punt return duties because of that. So, where is the relief? Where is the solution? How do they get better? Do they just have to, do different schemes, do different plays, try to coach up Owen into better positions? I think at this point of the season, it seems like that's where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, that can start to explain the chemistry bit slightly, maybe, but you would just think you'd be able to lean on the previous year. It doesn't seem like there's a great reason that Owen McCown and David Amador or Devin McEwen or Houston Thomas or I mean, and that's the other thing too. You can talk more like the receivers group might be banged up, but how
Where are
often do
the
we talk
tight
about the
ends?
strength of this tight ends group
Yeah.
and potentially getting those guys involved more? So it just doesn't feel like it's a personnel issue or a health issue. It just seems like and it's just you understand why everybody knows at this point about Jeff Traylor's kind of loyalty factor to his staff. We've been through this last year, and last year you see why because it sort of paid off in a way that those guys eventually developed. Both the coaching and the players and the whole offensive operation developed to where it was clicking at such a high level last year. And so you understand if you're the guy in the head chair sort of evaluating it, why you wouldn't want to move on from anything because you've seen that all these pieces can work at the exact level that you want them to. There's just got to be something that they have to put together that's not clicking or some reason that hasn't come together. It just feels like it would be hard to want to make significant personnel changes when you've seen what this group can do in previous seasons. So I understand certainly the frustration from the fans, but I also understand why there's probably not a whole lot that's going to change other than them just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I think they just have to find a way to get Owen on track, right? I think the screenplays that we've seen a lot of the last few weeks is maybe them trying to do that, right? Trying to get him into a rhythm. I don't know. He took a lot of shots against Colorado State. That was a physical defense, and it seems like whenever he faces those types of pressure and physical, front sevens, that I think that played a factor in what we saw on Saturday.
And yeah, I think that it's worth noting there was a play early in the game. I think it was when they went for it on fourth down and he tried to hit the pass to Amador in the flat. I didn't notice it live, but it looks like it hits his hand, his
Yeah,
throwing
on
hand,
the
right
helmet.
under
Yeah,
his helmet, and then he's kind of shaking it out on the sideline. And then the interception that was the jump ball to Patrick Overmeyer, which, he's got like a 5 inch height advantage on the guy who was covering him. And it was the most open of his three options based on what Owen was looking at the time against the 7-man pass rush. So I don't even know if he could throw it away. He's still in the pocket. So he probably didn't have a ton of options there. You
yeah,
think you could throw it up to your tight end, and at the very least, it'll fall as an incompletion. So I guess, just credit to Colorado State's guys for making a play. It was another example of that chemistry and cohesion looking like it's not all the way there, that Patrick Overmeyer wasn't ready for the pass and couldn't locate the ball
yeah,
in the. But Owen also looked very timid on that. He let go of it with maybe a little bit earlier than he had to and kind of immediately spun away. And it was the previous play that he was kind of grabbing at his midsection. And it just seemed like he was scared to take another hit there. I mean, potentially aggravating whatever small injury or bump he might have taken in that moment. So I think that there is maybe a room for a little bit of excuses in that way. And,
yeah,
I don't want to make it like to steal Jeff Traylor's thing. You don't want to make a soft bed for him, right? But like, I look for those things because there's no other reason that makes sense that Owen McCown wouldn't be at least as good as he was last year, if not better. So
yeah.
it just feels like there's got to be something maybe in that realm going on health wise that we don't know about, beyond what we saw in that game, or just that those things maybe in that moment got to him more than we thought. But it hasn't been like he's been, churning out production at a really high level all season. So something's just not all the way there with him yet. And I think that, figuring that out is obviously going to be the biggest key to getting the offense going again.
Yeah, I do think too, just it's finding his way. I mean, he's missed some passes, right? There's a few decisions. I mean, what was it? A double slant route we saw the guy underneath might have been open and he went to the guy further down the field and it just that wasn't the successful play. And yeah, obviously there's something these defenses are keen in on it, right? So that goes to coaching and trying to get that unit figured out, right? I think it's kind of a little bit of everything. I don't hate the play calling, but I feel like that's kind of the easy answer or easy excuse for it, where in reality it's a combination of everything. It's Owen's play, it's the play calling, it's the overall scheme. And just, I mean, now I guess it's health with the wide receivers.
Well, it's funny, like you just mentioned a play that I thought was really important that I wanted to bring up because everybody's on the offense and on Justin Burke, the offensive coordinator, for the predictability. And I mentioned earlier the third down draw calls where, we're up in the press box and I'm like, it's 3rd and 4, they're going to run a draw here, and they do it. But the problem is we've seen it succeed with the way that Robert Henry's been going, and like I mentioned, the long touchdown was one of those 3rd down draw calls. And again, Owen doesn't have everything going, but you mentioned that play where, I think it was Devin McEwen who he looked to on kind of a deeper route, and I forget who it was underneath, but they lined up, and I've never seen this exact formation where they had two tight ends kind of a set back into the backfield a little bit, and they both swung around to the other side of the formation to block, and it was like a max protection. And like you mentioned, the underneath receiver came open, and so, the predictability, sure, but they bust out a couple of things every week that we haven't seen before. How much? I mean, I know it went for like they went for like 6 yards or whatever, but they had the play where they brought out just a different kind of personnel group than we'd seen before, and they had Will Henderson out wide, and they rushed to the line so Colorado State can't ID it, and they run that like sweep play, and
Yeah,
he's almost able to get around the corner and turn it into a big gain. But that's like they're mixing in some two back stuff with that, and it's just, you can say that there's predictability, but I think at the same time there's also creativity that does exist within this. That even though it's some of the same guys we saw last year and the same offensive coordinator, they're still trying to incorporate and mix up and bring out new things each week. But you don't want to do too much of that because you can only rep so many things in practice. But I don't think it's fair to say that they're not being creative enough.
you're right.
there's certainly a reliance on certain calls, which I think is probably healthy in a lot of ways. But I think that every week there's a couple new things that they show that I'm like, all right, well, they're at least trying to find some kind of a spark, which is, that's the stuff that I look for when I'm evaluating the coordinators. Is like, are you at least sort of trying things,
Yeah.
because you're not guaranteed that anything's going to work, but you at least want to see the effort, and I think that that's there.
Right. And just based on the production that we've seen, I don't know if they should try less of that stuff, right? And try to maybe dial it back a little just to try to get this thing to where he's at 60%, 65% completion. And they have, they can go to their tight ends more and they can rely on that two running back set because I do think there's some neat creative stuff that they've been doing slightly every game and it's pretty cool, but just the overall production isn't working.
Yeah, and I think Owen has his favorite plays. It seems like, I mean, we've seen them have some success on just that slant pattern with the RPO, which is pretty straightforward. And I feel like he is always in his element when they do it's like one guy runs the bubble and the other guy pretends he's going to block and he's kind of
Yeah.
going up the sideline on a wheel route, and then the other guy's running the slant or whatever. And like, I mean, that's the Overmeyer interception was that play. So maybe I shouldn't, put that one over too much. But I think there's just like certain things that he specializes in and enjoys doing that they're not afraid to lean on. And maybe you do want to do more of that at the risk of becoming even more predictable, but
Right.
you gotta try something.
Yep, I hear you. Greg, I want to talk about the non-conference season in a whole here, but you think we wrapped up everything that we needed to in a 17-16 win? Hey, what did you think about that cannon they had on the field?
That was, I mean, I guess it's worth mentioning just from the perspective of Jeff Traylor mentioned after the game just how loud it was there. And the crowd was a little bit of a part of that. I think it was 32,000, but they really created a loud environment with the speaker right next to the bench and the PA and the cannon and all that on UTSA's side. And so you can chalk all that up to excuses too, but it did, I guess, gave them trouble communicating, at least to hear Jeff Traylor talk about it. So, and then we haven't mentioned kind of the altitude factor, which I
Yeah,
think
right.
maybe with the defense wearing down
At
towards
the
the
end.
part of it
Yep.
too. And they play a really deep rotation, so you think you can mitigate that somewhat. But at a certain point, when your offense just isn't moving the ball at all and you're out there a lot, that's going to become a factor too. So, turnovers that they didn't win the turnover battle. There's 2-0 the other way, and that always makes things look a little bit worse than they are. So, yeah, I think other than that, we've kind of hit all the key factors. We haven't talked about the penalties and stuff. So, yeah, I think we've roughly put that one to bed. Unless you got anything else you still wanted to hit on.
Special teams. A lot of chatter out there
Oh
about
yeah, of
special
course.
teams.
You know how I am with special teams. Just
Yeah.
didn't even think about it. But yeah, I think the punt return situation with is it Elliot
Yeah.
Bro?
Bro.
Uh,
Yeah.
it left a lot to be desired, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
There
He
was one.
almost broke one. He almost broke one. So
Yeah,
if they could get him not to field inside the 10, I think he's end up gonna be okay. I feel like we'll see.
yeah. He fielded the one at the 2. He
Yeah.
fielded the one on the bounce that looked dicey in the moment because you're always kind of questioning what's going on when the
That
punt
was a
return
great punt though, wasn't it?
gets hit right
Yeah.
away, but he kind of needed to catch that one there, or else it was going to roll a little bit. Now, maybe a coach would look at the film and tell you he should have run up and caught it initially
Yeah.
rather than having to play it off the bounce. But I think it was one of those low kind of liner punts. So that might have just put him in a tough spot. And maybe Colorado State knows it's a new guy back there and they're going to do some weird stuff intentionally. But, the one where he caught it, and then he did muff one
Yeah.
that put the offense in a bad spot when they needed all the help they can get. But in the times where he was able to get out and run a little bit, you saw some of that. And a lot of UTSA, we talked about the penalties, a lot of those were on special teams too.
Yeah.
Um, and it's one of those things I try to go back and watch all the games. Luckily, I forgot to record this one, but they did have an online stream. I had to watch commercials, but I was able to watch the online stream. And so, you look at the PFF snap counts before the game and you just see anything that jumps out. And then when on the rewatch, I look for it. And so I think Marcellus Wilkerson played like 4 snaps. I was like, what's up with that? But
Yeah.
so he picked up a really bad, really questionable block in the back penalty on one of those punt return situations. And I don't know if the coaches are just like, we've had enough of that. Like, you're just going to sit on the bench the rest of the game. But it's just things like that you kind of notice on the rewatch, and those penalties and special teams are only adding to the issues that UTSA is having on that side.
Yep. AOB as Jeff Traylor and Coach Knight say. We'll see. We'll see how the Roadrunners come out of this bye week, Greg. It seems like there was a concern with UTSA starting right tackle, and obviously it doesn't seem like the wide receiver group is in a great physical condition. So obviously some storylines there to monitor just from a big picture standpoint, looking at the first four games of the season. I get the angst amongst the fan base. It hasn't looked great or crisp in any of the games, but here we sit at a 2-2 record, and I don't know if they're really far off from what I expected.
Yeah, obviously A&M is going to be tough just to kind of go through it game by game. We've talked about how Texas State was kind of a toss-up game that they lost, and then Colorado State played like kind of a toss-up game that they won. And if you think that UTSA should be above playing toss-ups against those schools, especially Colorado State, you're probably right. I think that's fair. That
Mhm.
you would have wanted to see them go in there and handle that a little bit better, especially with just some of the things that Colorado State did that reflected an even worse performance than is kind of their baseline this year between the penalties and the quarterback play and things like that. So I think it's fair to be concerned. I do think we talked about this last week. The bigger issue from my perspective is just how strong the conference is. There's so many of these teams that look really formidable just based on what we've seen so far. And thankfully, if you're a UTSA fan, not all of the teams that are out here beating P5s are on the schedule this year, but there's not a ton of pushovers. I mean, Temple's probably a good place to start. That's as close to a game that you can feel really confident about as any. But it's there's a plenty of big tests here. Like North Texas looks a lot tougher than you would have thought. Tulane looks a lot tougher than you would have thought. South Florida looks a lot tougher than you would have thought. And those are all back to back. And then Army had the loss to the FCS school, and then they've looked really good since then. And East Carolina's shown flashes of being something. So you really got to get off to a good start against Temple and against Rice, and even Rice, like
Yeah.
under the your coach running this option stuff, who would have thought that they'd have the kind of success that they've enjoyed early. So yeah, there's a lot of things to be worried about internally, and then there's a lot of things to be worried about externally too, in terms of just how the league is going. But it does seem like, given that these receiver injuries evidently were not enough to keep those guys out of the game, presumably an open week would help them recover and
Yeah.
potentially get back closer to top form. And then, yeah, like you said, Jalen Garth will be interesting to monitor.
Yeah.
It took me a while to find that one on the. You can't even always see the numbers of the offensive
Yeah.
line unless you're looking for it, so you don't realize what play he went out. I think it was like late second quarter. It seemed like he got his arm like stuck between two defenders and might have got his elbow kind of hyperextended. And then the next play, he was basically playing with one arm. Like he had his left arm was like up close to his body, and he
Yeah.
was blocking with this one. And then he checked out after that and was not seen again. So they'll see. Maybe we'll get an update tomorrow on what that looks like when we go over there and do our media stuff. But um, that is certainly important. He's been key. But we talked about the offensive line depth, and DeAndre Marshall played well enough that it was not like a glaring factor during the game that he was getting beat and that it was showing up on the highlights quite a bit. So, I think either way they might be all right there, but certainly keeping Jalen Garth healthy would be huge.
Yeah, I do think it's important, and I'm probably the worst one when it comes to looking at the opposing defenses, right? Of how these guys prepare for UTSA and what in-game adjustments are made. And I think there's a little bit of work to be done there from UTSA's coaching staff in a preparation and an in-game scenario against some of these guys. Because I do think, these last two games specifically. Those opposing defenses, and Jeff Traylor mentioned kind of the chess match between the coordinators on the field during the game, and they've either been on par or have had their number, and UTSA's been able to kind of just make it work despite that.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that sort of the run game's working and the pass game's not working, and that
Yeah,
puts you in a different kind of lane than you usually want to be in. Because it felt like in previous years under Jeff Traylor that they just want to pass and they run because you're supposed to run, and now
yeah,
it's sort of flipped
opposite.
here
Yeah,
because they understand that the run game is what's been able to get them some production. The pass game just hasn't been able to hit it the same way, and so the thing is, it's just if a team wants to take away the run game, they can do it typically.
yeah.
Just a matter of how many
Stack
guys
the
you're going to
box.
the line
Yeah,
of scrimmage. And when the downfield passing's not there, I mean, they've talked about sort of how some of these screen plays and some of these short routes are the outlet to try to keep the pressure off the run game, but it's always just been kind of an accepted like axiom that your ability to pass the ball downfield stretches the defense and pulls the safeties back and opens up the run game. And we just haven't seen that part of
yeah,
it. So, there's a reason to believe that those secondary players can kind of crowd up near the line of scrimmage. And we've seen the linebackers do that too. Obviously, it got them in trouble on the play that
yeah,
that Robert Henry broke because they're close, but they're in the wrong lanes, and
yeah.
then the guy's gone. So, there's pros and cons of that. But generally speaking, being able to put those guys around the line of scrimmage because you're not scared of the pass game is going to make it more difficult on Robert Henry and then more difficult on the offense as a whole when nothing else working.
The Roadrunners open up league play next Saturday. They're off this Saturday. They're idle. Greg, I think UTSA could rattle off two more wins here. I don't know that they will look any prettier than what we've seen the other two wins. And, you're looking at maybe a four-game winning streak, and I don't know that everybody will be happy with that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's just going to depend what it looks like, I think. If they come out at Temple and look like the team that everybody thought they could be, which is not out of the realm of possibility, just because we've seen this team get better through the year in previous seasons. If that process continues or is even a little bit accelerated, how bad did people feel about UTSA at this time last year?
Right?
And then it's the end of October and they're beating Memphis,
Yeah.
a team that was getting top 25 votes. So I think we've seen that this program and this team, because it's a lot of the same guys, is capable of making pretty drastic improvements through the year. And so that's kind of funny. You'll reframe how you think about some of these lackluster wins if they become part of a winning streak that by the end you feel pretty good about the team's form. So I guess in that sense, the schedule shapes up pretty well for them. You would want to face some of these weaker opponents on the
Yep.
schedule earlier while
Yep.
you're not playing as well. And then from UTSA's perspective, they hope that as they round into form, then they're ready to push a North Texas or a Tulane or a USF in a way that if the game was played tomorrow, you might not feel so good about it.
Yeah, all of a sudden you look at so the next three games, the three-game pod, if you will, the next
Ah, the
pod.
pop
Yeah,
back.
I mean that these games become critical. They're all game of the year almost, right? And then I circle that North Texas. A lot of people have North Texas as a dark horse for college football playoff, Greg.
Yeah, well, it's just because there's all these teams in the league have been really good. I mean, Tulane and USF have been in that conversation more normally, and North Texas, just with the record and the explosiveness of the offense, you understand why they're getting some buzz. So, yeah, they play. There's I don't know how many really tough teams there are in the league. You can look at those three, and then Memphis, and then I'm probably not thinking of the ones who aren't on the schedule, like Navy's in the mix for
Yep.
that too. Probably not regarded as highly as those other three, but or four, I should say. But we had UTSA kind of, if not in that mix, then close to it. And now it feels like there's a little bit of a gap between where their current form is right now and the level that those teams are playing at. So certainly, I still think based on all the things that led us to like UTSA's chances in the preseason, that they have the ability to get it cleaned up and get to that level. But again, right now, you just don't feel as good about it.
What did we say in the preseason? Our over under was 7.5 and wins, and we both took the over.
Yeah, I think I want to say I went with 8-4. I didn't have to write it anywhere, so I don't
Yeah.
know for sure, but I think I went with 8-4.
Yeah, I think I wrote 8-4. So a third of the way in, do you change your record prediction, Greg?
Oh, hey. Wow, that's a great question.
Yeah,
So, well, because
I'll go on record as saying I do think that there's 6 wins left on this schedule somewhere. So I will say I will not change my
so you have
prediction.
6-2 the rest of the way.
Yep.
And that means they have to win at least two of at North Texas, at South Florida, home against Tulane, and home against Army.
Yeah, you split those. I've always said you're gonna split those, and that's where I feel.
I don't know. I guess home against East
Hey,
Carolina, you'll feel pretty good about.
nobody thought North Texas was gonna be anywhere close to being this good, and they hit on that quarterback. I mean, I don't even think he was a starter in high school, right? So what
Yeah.
happens the rest of the way? You
I
see
have a
6 wins on
I have
there?
a hard time not going seven. I think I have to go 7-5 at the moment.
Okay.
I think I just have to adjust it down one, just based on the strength of the league overall, because there's not as many gimmies as I thought there would be. I
Yeah.
guess how good do you feel pretty good about at Charlotte,
Yeah.
these next two, but yeah, there's a lot of games on there that are tough. I don't know. It's just not. I thought they'd have some more that felt kind of like layups where UTSA is clicking and these other teams are not at that high of a level and they just come in there as a huge favorite and take care of business. But it just doesn't feel like there's that many of those games on the schedule anymore.
Yep. I do feel like we will be in a lot of barn burner type games the rest of the way here. So
We're no
um
stranger to that. It's just
yeah.
that lately they have not done as well as finishing those out as we're used to.
Yeah.
And it was always an interesting conversation of, if one or two plays goes the other way, or if they can't come up with all these one score wins, do we feel differently about this team and this program? And I remember I was trying to make it a talking point around Traylor's contract extension of just like, how close are you to not liking this guy this much? And now we're kind of
Yeah.
seeing the other side of that. So
Yeah.
I guess those things do sort of just even out over time. It was interesting to ask Jeff about the close games and have him say, you need to be able to lead a 2-minute drive, which we haven't really seen, and you need to be able to rush the passer, which we haven't really seen, and that there are things that he thinks more directly correlate to those close games other than just like one score games are going to be 50-50,
Yeah.
which is kind of how like the stats community sort of looks at it. So um I kind of think it'll just come down to a lot of those, and we'll see if they have some of that Roadrunner magic or whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it that we've gotten used to, or if it's just kind of if Frank Harris took all that with him when he left.
Greg, do we want to talk about anything about Oklahoma State?
Yeah, this is still relatively new news within the last few
Yeah.
hours. I think it bears monitoring. I think anybody who's going to do their due diligence will say that the last couple of years have not been, counting this season and last season, have not been the most impressive coaching job by Jeff Traylor to this point. He ended up getting a lot of credit towards the end of last season for turning it around, but at the end of the day, I think people who weren't with us through that whole ride narratively, I don't think the Oklahoma State people were plugged into that, are just going to look at the record and say that it's not particularly impressive. And so generally, I would be of the belief that he's probably farther down the list, but I can't say I've like talked to anybody or checked on that at this point since it's still relatively fresh. I'm interested to ask tomorrow just if he's felt like he had to address it with the team because obviously the rumors are floating. But I don't know. What do you think? Do you see that being something that we have to be paying attention to?
I don't know. I haven't asked anybody or I don't know anything, but I will say any list of any school close to Texas, Oklahoma State, Arkansas, maybe, is going to have Jeff Traylor's name on the list, regardless of what's happened the last 2 years, right? He could still recruit. You give him a big NIL rev share budget, and he's going to be there. Now, are there other candidates maybe better positioned that at administration would think are more favorable? They could get a little bit cheaper, right? The buyout's a real thing.
Well, even just, look up the road, like how is Kenny not a more
Yep.
attractive prospect at this point? Just kind of like younger, it's a sexier hire. You would think that based on just how quickly he's brought about change at the programs he's had, there's some upside there. And he's obviously been in the game longer and is less proven, but has beaten UTSA the last 2 years. And so, and went to play at Tulsa. Maybe he's got a little bit more of an Oklahoma connection than Jeff Traylor has. So it
Throw
just
Eric Morris. You could throw Eric Morris's name in there too.
Sure. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
there are names now that make more sense to me, but it's funny because like what if the people of Oklahoma State just like Jeff, right?
Yeah.
Like that's all it would really take.
Right.
So that's why we have to sort of be on guard for it because even if you can lay out all these reasons that he's not the best candidate, they might just want him anyway.
Yeah.
Cultural fit or whatever. Like there's plenty of reasons that it could be a thing. So it bears monitoring just from that perspective, even if you think that there's other guys who are more qualified. But I still would assume that they'll go a different direction at the end of the day.
Yep. We'll see. We'll ask the question and see about a generic answer tomorrow. Hopefully. Hopefully. So I think we hit everything, Greg. The Roadrunners are 2-2. It's not great, but I don't think it's all that terrible. And we'll see if they could scheme up some stuff and start looking better in these next few weeks, right?
Yeah, October to remember or whatever. I mean, we're gonna do the thing we do every year, where September's bad and then they get it going, and then by the end of the year, everybody's happy. I'm sure that's where we'll end up.
Yep, we'll see. Well, I appreciate everybody watching. That is Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. I'm JJ Perez with Inside Runner Sports. Thanks, everyone.